Welcome, everybody, to Microsoft Unboxed podcast. This is episode 16. I'm your host today, Kareem Anderson. I'm joined by,
David Allen, I'm still alive.
yes, he made it through the weekend, even though his life was probably threatened several times, I would assume, from his comments from last week. If you don't know what we're talking about, go listen to last week's pod to fill yourself in. We're going to move on from that, incur the wrath again this week. We got Microsoft news for you folks. We have stuff to talk about. We have things such as Teams Classic and what the actual expiration date is for that. We'll all be forced to deal with the new version of Teams, whether we like it or not. We also had earnings for their fiscal year 2024. It's Q3. We'll tell you the ups and downs of that whole investor situation. For the most part, it's good, so nothing to hold your breath about. Microsoft and Meta are working on a new project, which could be gaming inspired. We'll get into the details about that. Microsoft's also finally just admitting that ads will be in Windows. They've been telling us since Windows 8 that these aren't an ad, these are just suggestions, these are just placeholders for things that you might want. No, these are ads, ladies and gentlemen. And for those of you who have been calling them ads, you feel vindicated, Paul Thurrott and the rest. We'll also be talking about the Surface Pro 10, new Snapdragon Elite X and I believe X Plus benchmarks. Again, people are getting super giddy for these things. I'm surprised you haven't actually seen any leaked hardware yet, but everyone's getting super hyped about it. Some people, I even think one of the journalists over at Windows Central went back and started playing around with the Surface Pro 10 or Surface Pro X, as it were, and said they've fallen back in love with it. So who knows what this new chipset will bring for these new devices. Then we'll be wrapping up with the last two kind of stories about Google delaying its Privacy Sandbox rollout for a third time, for those of you who've been keeping track. If not, I will fill you in on that. And Microsoft Copilot getting a very enterprising thing, which kind of hints at where Microsoft wants AI to go versus where we want AI to go. And we'll have that as a discussion as well. With that being said, do you want to let everybody know what our first topic is, please?
Yes, sir. I'm going to jump right in. Microsoft Teams Classic. If you're still one of those folks, Microsoft has given you the expiration date for that. Most of us have moved on to the new version of Teams. Microsoft called it Microsoft Teams 2.0. I know here at Microsoft Unboxed, we have moved to Teams 2.0, and from a personal opinion, I like it a lot better than Teams Classic. Its features aren't all that different, but it's a lot more optimized, works a lot better, it's a lot quicker. But if you're looking to stick with Teams Classic, the support ends here in just a couple months at July 1, 2024, and if you're on an older version of Windows, you can expect your version to stop working somewhere about October 23rd of this year, so just a few months ahead. And if you're on a current version of Windows, I'm not sure what difference this makes. If you're on Windows 11, your support and it stops working July 1 of 2025. Now, Microsoft does say if you're a straggler and you're still wanting to hold on to the old version, the web version will still be available. I know, there are people out there in the enterprise that rely on their IT department to make these things available. And maybe you've still got some old hardware out there that needs the old version. But basically, you're, let's call it almost a little over a year from the classic version of Teams being completely done. So get in there, make that upgrade to Teams 2.0. It has worked well for us. I will say that for those that want a little feedback, it has worked well for us. There's not been, a whole lot of crashes or anything like that. So there's really no need. Jump in there, give it a shot.
Yeah, I got nothing to add to that story. Just try it out while you still have the time and make the decision whether or not you want to stick with that, try the new one, or move on to something else because there are plenty of enterprise chat options out there. We're going to be moving on to Microsoft's fiscal report, which, Teams is one of the business sectors that is doing very well for Microsoft. We'll get into the details about it. But if you just need a Cliff Notes version of what happened, Microsoft made lots of money. They beat expectations. Expectations were set, incrementally higher than they were from last earnings report and from the year before. For just some of the details about it, Microsoft Business basically brought in. Let me sure I may get all the numbers for you. 21.9 billion in net income off of 61.9 billion in revenue. So again, doing really well. They're up basically about 20% in net income, which is always great because that's what you basically put in the bank, and 17% on revenue, meaning that most of the business sectors improved year over year. I believe Microsoft CEO, on the phone call said it was a record third quarter powered by continued strength of the Microsoft Cloud. Surprise, surprise, which surpassed 35 billion in revenue. Again, up 23% as its own individual division within the business. Microsoft's Copilot and Copilot Stack, spanning everyday productivity businesses and processes and developer services to models, data, and infrastructure, are orchestrating a new era of AI transformation, driving better business outcomes across every role. So again, this is Microsoft touting that their investments in AI over the last, 5-6 years are really starting to pay off these last last quarter, especially. More specifically, Microsoft's Intelligent Cloud, which again will house AI alongside Azure, which is again one of the massive drivers for the company, is its own business unit, brought in 26.7 billion in revenue. Again, that's up 21% year over year, and I say that's impressive because they're still competing with Amazon. By the way, AWS is still the big elephant in the room, and they're still seeing, over 15% increases in revenue, and which means that again, there's a wide sea of potential cloud users and customers that Amazon is using, and Microsoft is still seeing gains from that, which is good. When those gains start to get below 15%, that's when you start to see, investors and other businesses saying, all right, where's the growth going to be at? But for now, it's still very big for Microsoft. Server and cloud services revenue was up 24%, while Azure and the other cloud services jumped 30%. AI services contributed about 7 points of growth to Azure. Microsoft also reported that its enterprise mobility install grew about 10%, with over 274 million seats. So while Microsoft might not be in smartphones, they do have services that span across them and are working pretty well. Productivity and business process delivered about 19.6 billion in revenue, again about 12% year over year, which is driven mostly by Office 365 commercial products, the stuff that your office pays for, your businesses pay for, not necessarily the things that you pay for individually. The cloud services revenue was up about 13%, while Microsoft's Office 365 commercial revenue was up about 15%. Again, as long as you stay above that 50% hover line, you don't start to get those nagging calls from investors like, oh, we're worried about potential growth. The seats grew by about 15%, which is, again, very good. On the consumer side, Office consumer products services grew about 4%. This is where you start to see, you might hear those like, hey, where do we get new users? Or where is potential competition chewing away at that? Microsoft consumer subscribers hit about 80.8 million as far as, seats are concerned, people paying for it, up 14% year over year. So, admittedly, there's Google Docs, which is out there, which is probably eating into that. People just figure out different ways to utilize Office services without necessarily paying for it, and the consumer side. So you might get a doc, you may just have a PDF reader that allows you to read it without actually opening it in Office or Word or anything like that. So again, these are all side tangents. There's also more personal computing, and this is where Microsoft's has been lagging for the most part, and mostly because of Windows OEM licenses, but not this quarter. As more personal computing business, which is again all the fun stuff, Xbox, Windows, Surface, things like that. They were up, I believe, 12% year over year, where they brought in about 15.6 billion in revenue. Windows revenues, which again, OEM licenses, where Lenovo, HP, Dell, all those pay Microsoft in order to use Windows, were up 8%, which is compared to the 28% drop that it had the year earlier. Again, we're starting to see a slow climb of PC sales coming back, which again is mostly for when Microsoft sees a decline in that means OEMs are saying, hey, I'm not selling PCs, so I don't need that many licenses, and that affects their bottom line. But thankfully for this quarter, apparently they do. Microsoft's hardware business, which is probably the biggest blotch on this entire report, was down. Service revenue was down 17% year over year, following drops of 9, 22, 20, and 30% in previous 4 quarters. And the Xbox hardware revenue was down 31%. You can contribute that to Xbox just not having any new hardware to really sell, and Microsoft's intentional shift to cloud and subscription gaming being one of the major drivers in that. As far as the Surface hardware, that's a mixed bag. Had a real big push for the last couple of years. They've kind of reiterated. They've done a couple spec bumps, but nothing that's been impressive enough to kind of drive or market the hardware as a need-to-have device. That may change in May 20th, I believe, when they introduce these new ARM-based ones only for consumers. We'll see how these Intel ones do as far as businesses are replacing those devices. And that's the gist of it. I will give you a couple of highlight points, and then I'll let you jump in real quick if you have any comments about this. The Dell accredited, again, Microsoft's big quarterly earnings to AI. And I see, obviously he's got to market that. I don't know how well specifically it has been doing, because they haven't given us numbers on like, hey, how many people are paying for Copilot, so to speak. But it contributed to Azure growth, regardless, and how much people were spending per this quarter. Over 60% of Fortune 500 companies now use Copilot. At least that was something that they had pointed out. Copilot in Windows is now available nearly 225 PCs. That combines both Windows 10 and Windows 11, which is again up 200% quarter over quarter. So they got a big push when they pushed everything down to Windows 10, or making that available on Windows 10. GitHub Copilot now has over 1.8 million paid subscribers. So again, that's been pretty big for them. If you're a developer and you just need to crank out some, basic code really quickly, and that's showing about 35% growth year over year. About 90% of Fortune 500 companies are using AI-powered developer services, with revenues in that market of about 45% year over year. Bing has over 140 million daily active users. I don't know where that stood from last time. I think they were still in the hundreds, but if it's 10 more million users, that's still pretty big. In gaming, Microsoft set its third fiscal quarter records for game streaming hours, console usage, and monthly active devices. So people who do have Xboxes are enjoying them. They're just not necessarily jumping from PlayStation over or looking from Switch to the Nintendo Switch to an Xbox. Game Pass subscribers played over 10 million hours of Diablo, Activision Blizzard title, and other notable Activision Blizzard titles. Activision contributed. This is the big thing. This is also another big thing I kind of pointed out in my writing, is that Activision's are not already paying for itself, but it's contributing a lot to the almost $70 billion hole that it kind of put Microsoft into initially. Microsoft's CFO Amy Hood noted that gaming results were ahead of expectations, primarily driven by continued success of Call of Duty. Activision was also contributed a negative 2 points on the overall growth of the business income, because again, they're still accounting for that billions of dollars that they put down to pay for it. But as long as the games keep producing and Microsoft keeps pushing the subscriptions to Game Pass and offering new games and new deals, things like that, it will probably pay for itself in the next 5 to 10 years, I think. Again, ahead of expectations. Lastly, overall Surface demand was lower than expected. And again, I think that's just because everybody in the market's making amazing laptops at this point. But Microsoft says they remain focused on its higher margin premium products, and that what will happen, we'll see what happens with this next iteration of Surface, the Surface Pro 10 and the Surface Laptop 6, and see if they can kind of, gin up some more enthusiasm for Microsoft's, first party hardware. I believe that's going to be it. I don't know. I didn't really get into what their expectations or settings were for investors again, but I do remember them delivering 8.9 billion back to investors through again dividends and shareable stocks. So investors seem to be happy with them. I didn't clock the after hours trading, but I wouldn't suspect that it went down at all. So Microsoft had a good quarter. What are your thoughts on that?
I will keep it brief, but I think one of the main things at the consumer level was that you mentioned PC sales are headed back because Windows is seeing that, or Microsoft is seeing that kick in Windows licenses. I think that's good for the industry overall. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the next 2 quarters play out with all these new PCs coming out. These ARM based PCs, who buys them, who needs that Windows license, who produces them, and what does that do for revenue? And I think it's also going to be key to kind of jump over to AI, which seems to be building a slow cash cow. Where does that go from here? Is Are we still in that excitement phase? Of what can AI do? Where does it settle out to where people are like, okay, I don't need this, or yes, I do need this. I think we're somewhat still in the excitement phase of people seeing what it's all about. I think we're a few quarters away maybe from seeing it. I don't want to say level off because Copilot will be improving for several quarters to come, but I think a lot of companies are going to make the decision based on their workflows. Yes, I need this. No, I don't. So to your point, yes, some of these other divisions are helping pay for the $70 billion cash cow of Activision. And as you said, the Xbox folks are out there, enjoying their consoles, enjoying their purchases. But we've also heard the rumors of the last quarter of this year, there will be some sort of Xbox hardware. We've heard that from Phil Spencer and a few other folks. So I think Microsoft overall is in a good place. They're certainly in a better place than they have been with PC sales coming up and these new ARM chips coming out. It's certainly going to be a boost for their hardware division, you would hope, and certainly a boost for their licensing and software.
Totally agree with you. As far as the gaming, I'll just add one other note and then we can move on. Again, this is a long game. They are taking kind of a nosedive, not necessarily nosedive, but they are taking a slower approach to the transition. I think they are basically counting on companies like Lenovo, Dell, so who make these handheld games, who are also building slimmer, more attractive laptop gaming PCs. Because what will eventually happen, I think, or what they're envisioning is that your PC, no matter which one you're using, and I think they're also counting on ARM to help them out with this a little bit, will be powerful enough to play the games or stream through the cloud, that they can start shifting their metrics from individual consoles that are specified that have one function only to now saying, hey, we're including them in all PCs being sold as gaming devices. So that number goes from slowly declining as something that is made specifically from Microsoft to exploding to counting everything that's made or counted as a PC as a gaming device. So you go from 50 billion in a generation, 50.1 or whatever, to laptops are sold per quarter, like 20, 30 million or something like that, to almost 280 million devices per year, if not more. So, it's really gonna. I think that again, that's what I'm assuming that they're envisioning. Like they will change those numbers once more people start adopting, these more powerful, more consumer-friendly versions of these gaming laptops. And you can probably talk more about that later. We talk about, Lenovo's the gaming laptops they've offered you to review and stuff like that.
I think that that's coming quick, fast, and in a hurry. I know Lenovo has sent me a couple of gaming laptops, in particular the 5i, and I know there's a update to their 14-inch coming last year that came out, I guess, in the third quarter of the year, and we have seen that Asus has come out with their normal G14, and Alienware jumped right in behind that with their Alienware X14. And while we have not had a chance to review the G14 and the X14, what I'm seeing is efficiency. It's not so much power and frame rates this year, it's efficiency and how efficient they're able to produce that 60 frames a second, that 120 frames a second, of whatever that device is capable of. And to your point, I think we're inching in probably quicker than we realize to buying that device that is ARM powered, that is good enough out of the box to play AAA games at 60 frames. I don't think we're going to get to the high frame rate yet. I don't think Snapdragon is there, but they have said, yes, we do have better CPUs in the pipeline. So I think it's coming, to your point, to where you have one device that is energy efficient for your daily workflow, your daily productivity. But yet when you come home, you can plug it into your external screen and you can still stream your Xbox games. Or if you're in PC Game Pass, you can play your AAA titles at a reasonable frame rate and be happy. And I can tell you from a personal standpoint, when that happens, I'm buying. I mean
Well, yeah, and that's the thing.
that's just it. I'll
I
be
also think that
purchasing
people
whatever.
don't want necessarily, not everybody. Again, I think gamers are a specific niche crowd, but if you can meld them and get consumers who don't want an alien looking typewriter, if they can get more of those subtle razor kind of looks like a MacBook kind of thing, I think more people will buy them. Moving on now, talking about gaming still, we're gonna be talking about Microsoft and Meta working on a new headset. What are the details on that? You wrote about this.
This kind of surprised me. I did not see this coming. I'll kind of cut this short for you folks. Meta has gone open source, basically, in the sense that they have this new division slash partnership called Meta Horizon, where anybody can go use the schematics, the software, etc., to develop their own headsets and even use the Oculus software. Now, the hope here is very similar to what you were talking about with some of the handheld, and even we have talked about in the past with some of the Xbox hardware. This allows the Lenovo's, the Asus to say, hey, we're going to use the framework that Meta has provided to build our own headset. And I think that's a good idea. But then, what caught my attention was a couple of lines near the end of the news release where Meta and Xbox are working together on an inspired, that was the word used, on an Xbox inspired headset. So we do know that cloud gaming came to the Meta headset, the Quest 2 and 3, in beta form where you could play your cloud gaming games in 2D. So what is Microsoft and Meta cooking? Maybe in the 3D space is interesting to me because we know PlayStation came out with their VR headset. I think they've had to scale that back, if I remember correctly, that hasn't been quite as successful as they had hoped. So did Microsoft see that writing on the wall and say, hey, we're going to partner with Meta and have a headset that is Xbox compatible, but still does other things? I think that is a very real possibility.
Yeah, I don't disagree. We'll be moving on to our next topic, which is actually about Google, and we'll get into some of their earnings as well as a result of this. But Google has delayed the privacy sandbox for a third time. Uh, for those of you who are, I guess, sort of familiar with it, or maybe, or just need a refresher, Google's privacy sandbox was kind of a big thing back in 2019, um, when it was I believe I had labeled it, and maybe other people right at the same time had labeled it the cookie apocalypse. This is also when Facebook was getting major pushback from uh, Apple about the way that cookies are tracking things, and so Google tried to preempt that by saying, like, "Hey, we will provide a new platform, a new way for advertisers to basically follow slash not follow people, depending on their opt-in and opt-out measures. Essentially, it's an initiative to create a web standard for websites to access user information without compromising privacy, is what they say. It aims to replace third-party cookies with privacy-preserving technologies that allow group-based targeting and measurement of online advertising. The goal is to improve user privacy while preserving the viability of the open web. So I don't know if they've gotten other people to sign on to this. I doubt that they did. I don't know if Facebook has already done it, because if they did, Google really left them in the dust on this, because they haven't even officially rolled it out yet. They revisited this whole topic back in right around the pandemic, or 2022, saying, hey, we promised you guys this in 2021. We just need a little bit more time to get more people on board and figure out this technology that will give advertisers what they want, so we can still make money, but also protect your privacy, which are in stark contrast to each other, which is exactly why when Apple kind of laid the gauntlet down and said, hey, you're no longer allowed to track our users, Facebook lost, I think it was like a quarter of the revenue, like almost overnight. And so Google, having seen this, has kind of placated, I believe, the EU and the United States, stuff like that, saying, hey, we're working on it still. Well, suffice to say, they don't think they'll be ready for it until sometime early 2025. So from 2019, promised to 2021, I believe, to 2025 now. And I presume that we'll see perhaps another delay sometime in 2025, saying, hey, we can't figure this out yet. We still need more time. Because Google makes a lion's share of their revenue and profits from advertising. And to put in a self-placed deprecator doesn't seem good for business. Sounds great, makes good headlines, great PR, but I don't see them rolling this out anytime soon. What are your thoughts on this before I move into exactly how much they make from advertising?
I'm just going to shake my head right here and say that 2030 will come along and we'll still be waiting for this, because Google is not foolish. They're not going to interrupt the cash cow unless the privacy folks and some government regulators get involved and say, hey, we don't like what we're seeing here, and we're going to force you to make a move for consumer privacy. Maybe some of these privacy groups, maybe the EU decides, hey, we don't like this either, and we'll, jump on this bandwagon because they can't win any of the other bandwagons. Or maybe the FTC jumps on it and says, hey, we don't like it, so we'll take a shot at this. They seem to be taking shots at other things. But until somebody says, we're going to force you to do this, I think 2030 will be here, and we will still be looking at a similar situation as to what they do now. Why interrupt the cash cow? I wouldn't.
Exactly. Speaking of cash cows, Alphabet, which is the parent company to Google, because they did some kind of weird shuffling of names, through like it was 3-card Monte kind of game with this. They announced that it earned a net income of 23.7 billion of revenue, 23.7 billion in net income off of 80.5 billion in revenue for this previous quarter. This past quarter that's happened. Those figures are a gain about 57% over in net income, and 15.4% in revenue year over year. So they beat expectations as well, just like Microsoft did, because I think people perhaps undervalued search, especially in light of perhaps new marketing for AI, which didn't play as big of a role in what Google's quarterly earnings were as much as everyone thought they were going to be. Again, everyone was expecting AI to shift the behavior of search, and that shifting would have negatively affect Google. It didn't, because people still don't know much about AI, and people still rely on search. And Google makes no mention really of AI at all, really, in this whole thing. They basically say our results, quote, our results in the first quarter reflect strong performance from search, YouTube, and cloud, which is what Sundar Pichai, which is the CEO of Google, mentioned. We are well aware. I mean, we are well underway with our Gemini era, and there's great momentum across the company. Our leadership in AI research and infrastructure, and our global product footprint positions us well for the next wave of AI innovations. But they didn't, like Nadella, say that it contributed very much. Specifically, advertising was a primary driver for Google, with 61.7 billion in revenue across Google Search, YouTube, and Google Network, which is up 13% year over year. And that basically accounts for about 77% of Alphabet, not just Google, but Alphabet's revenue from just ads alone. So again, remember, Alphabet is the parent company that also does some of their like DeepMind stuff and some of their offshoots and all that stuff. It's all being funneled through Google Ads, and Google itself makes up probably about 80% of Google Ads or whatnot. And again, Google's subscription platforms and devices contribute about 8.7 billion in revenue. So they're doing a bit better than Surface is doing at the moment. But again, this is counting subscriptions and not just hardware. They're all kind of bundled together. And that's up 17.9% year over year. And Google Cloud delivered 9.6 billion in revenue, which is up 28.4% year over year. So again, I want to put this in context. We have AWS at the top still, Microsoft, somewhere below them, not too far below them they used to be, and Google making strides. They're still distant third spot, but they are making strides as well. So those are your three, and then there's IBM and Salesforce and some other companies that kind of trickle down below them. The firm didn't deliver any specifics about the success that it's seen with Gemini so far, or how Copilot is kind of competing against it. In a post-earnings conference call with CFO Ruth Porat, he only noted that Google spent $12 billion in capital expenditures building out its AI infrastructure this past quarter alone, and it's a massive increase of 91% year over year. So they are trying to catch up or position themselves for the future, and they're doing it to the tune of 12 billion at least per quarter, we're assuming. And it also spent about 11 billion on AI and other research development in the other quarter. So again, so they're spending about 12 billion per quarter to kind of stay or maintain a position in the AI future. But right now, ads are what makes most of their money. And it goes to our previous point about them rolling out the sandbox. Imagine trying to invest $12 billion and then cutting a potential billion or so by limiting how much you can sell advertisers. It's a no-go. So until probably AI starts to make its own money back, we won't see a sufficient replacement for cookies in the way that it's currently being tracked, to your point, until 2030 maybe. Last thoughts?
To your point, when you started laying out those numbers, 12 billion a quarter, folks. There are plenty of companies in the, out there that are good companies that don't have that to spend in a year. So can you imagine? This was what was going through my head when you said it. I'm gonna share it. Can you imagine if they adopted this new privacy for advertising, or if somebody was to come crack down on Google and say, "Hey, you're going to make this change"? There's an issue here that has to be dealt with, because I'm not going to say it could be the end of Google, but Google could really take some heavy shots to make them think about their future and how they do business and what they do, because, let's take a shot at their advertising. While they're spending $12 billion a quarter, you can't do that. I don't see where Google survives in the form that we know. So why would they want to basically shoot themselves in the foot while they're funding $12 billion a quarter. Now, I will say this: if they have any real intentions of making this privacy initiative happen, I could see it happening once they catch up in AI and they're not spending $12 billion a quarter anymore. When that is, only they know. But I don't see it happening in any time in the near future without some help from Mr. Legal Lawyer Source up in the corner somewhere.
Totally agree. We're going to move on from earnings necessarily and get into some more fun, exciting things for you folks. We're going to be talking about new Surface hardware and how it's shaping up. You got some reports. So we're going to talk about the Surface Pro 10 and the Snapdragon X Plus spotted.
I think this is, for me, I want it today. I would be okay if I had it yesterday. This is, the most that I have been excited over hardware in a very long time. And the fact that Microsoft is doing it just kind of ups the excitement for me. So we have talked about the Snapdragon Elite here over the last few weeks, and the Snapdragon Elite coming to the Surface lineup for the Surface laptop and the Surface Pro. Well, Snapdragon has come out and says, hey, there's going to be a cheaper option here. We're going to call it the Snapdragon Plus. And we do believe that that is a real Surface product because there was a benchmark that was leaked, and I use that term loosely, that was leaked showing a score of 1903. And if you look down at the system information, it was very clear that you had a Surface device there running that Plus chip. So the Plus chip is anticipated to be the cheaper model. Maybe you'll be lacking a few GPU cores, maybe, and the core speed is a little bit slower, but something we are seeing. The core speed, for those that want to know, is about 3.42 gigahertz. And something we're seeing is the default of 16 gig of RAM in these AI devices, and that kind of goes back to something you talked about last week with the AI being part of the new file explorer, and that it's going to take 16 gig of RAM to run that. So it's possible we're seeing the emergence of, sorry Apple, but 8 gig of RAM not being sufficient. And I think devices may be moving to a 16 gig default with a 32 gig premium. We've kind of been in the 8 gig default with the 16 gig premium here for a little while. With, if you're a quote power user, you might move up to 32 gig. But it's going to be interesting to see the pricing that gets put on these devices and what the gap is between the Plus model Snapdragon and the Elite model. Is the Plus model cheaper or cheap enough to bring that consumer in? Or is the gap close enough to say, well, I'll just go ahead and buy the Elite and be set for a longer period of time? For example, is the Elite, and I'm just making these numbers up, is the Elite $999 and the Plus $799, $800? So it would make that consumer think, which one do they want? And I don't think anybody's really going to know until we see these devices perform and see what the real day-to-day difference is between the Plus and the Elite. From those that have been lucky enough to get their hands on some of these devices at one of these Snapdragon events a couple weeks ago, I've heard nothing but good things. I mean, even our buddy Paul Thurrott, Mr. Negativity sometimes, is talking about the Snapdragon CPUs, in a very positive light.
Yeah, I got nothing else to add to that. Just that for those of you who might have had a brief moment of panic, maybe a minor panic attack about the mess that this could have potentially created for going to the website to configure it, just take a breather and replace Intel with Snapdragon,
Yes.
and you'll start to see the tiers because Intel, obviously offered an i5. They offered their U versions and their H versions. Microsoft won't be cluttering its consumer sales portal with both Intel and Snapdragon processors. They'll just be Snapdragon ones. So now they'll just say, you'll have one that says Pro, and it'll offer you probably two different sets of configurations, going from 16 to maybe 32 gigabytes. I believe it supports 32. Uh, and storage differences. As far as the speeds, they won't list any of that. And then you'll have the Elites, which will probably offer you anywhere between 16 and 64 gigabytes with probably two or three different storage capacities to match any of those configurations. So ideally, you won't have a mess of Intel, ARM, and AMD to kind of sort through, and then the different tiers of performance through those. Hopefully, this is a way that Microsoft should simplify its sales pitch for the Surface device, and hopefully, maybe that'll result in more sales for it in the future. Speaking of which, talking about sales, we're going to get into our next topic, which is Microsoft trying to sell, or no longer trying to sell anybody on the fact that these recommended apps aren't ads. This is I believe, a victory lap for a lot of people who have been over the years. I believe Tom Warren's one of them. Paul Surratt's obviously one. Other people, Leo Laporte, who's, everyone's talked about this and said, hey, these are ads. And there have been those of us, like myself, I will put myself solely in that camp, saying, no, these are recommendations, these are suggestions, you don't have to do anything about it. Well, Microsoft basically is building in code to now include the word ad specifically in this section for the customization, personalization of the start menu. I believe, let me see if I can get all the details on that. Albacore is his name, at least on Twitter. The full at Twitter symbol is, what is the full one? Let me make sure I get it right, because I want to make sure he gets credit, and you go visit his Twitter handle. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I'm still scrolling through my own writing. The book is closed. The book is closed. He found a new string of text after enabling an experiment in the latest Windows Insider Canary channel release that specifically mentions that the start menu will, quote, show recommendations for tips, shortcuts, new apps, ads, and more. Again, Microsoft has been kind of pushing ads in the operating system since Windows 8. And they've kind of shown up, like, again, as recommended apps to potentially download. They kind of did a little bit more in Windows 10, and it's become annoying for a lot of people in Windows 11 because of the limited screen space. The real estate that you have isn't the entire canvas like Windows 8 was, where you can kind of get lost. The ad can get lost amongst all your other, start UI. Now that you've got, just that small recommended section, when there's an app in there or an icon, a placeholder for something that you don't have time for or didn't necessarily look to put there, kind of ruins your flow. It's going to stick out like a sore thumb. Again, in addition to being reminded of the lack of personalization that you have on this device, that you spent however much money on, and you open it out of the box and there's already stuff on there that you didn't put on there, it's also been applied consistently by Microsoft. It will be, sometimes the app will be a placeholder, or the icon will be a placeholder where you then have, or then moved over to the Windows Store and Microsoft Store to download it. And other times it'll just be installed. You'll be like, hey, I have to install this. I never installed it in the first place. When did it show up? How did it get here? So hopefully Microsoft fixes that. The only good part of this news that I'm giving you guys, because again, it's been pretty negative, is that Albacore also found a new UDK API that makes requests to the Edge browser to help pull preferences and browser personalizations into the start menu. That's, it's potentially tying these two things together so that you can get better targeted ads. Again, Microsoft's not moving away from this. They're actually apparently emboldened to just put ads in the copy and say this is exactly what it is. So with that being said, at least they can give us ads that are targeted. Stuff like, I get on Instagram where I'm actually, 7 times out of 10 potentially going to buy something from these ads that I see. hopefully with the idea of pulling or making a call to the Edge browser where people have spent a lot of time and customized it or personalized it. And if they haven't, they've at least pulled all their stuff from Chrome into that, and it's kind of mimicked the exact same thing. That now they will start getting ads that make more sense instead of getting, hey, why don't you buy Office 365 when you're using a paid version of PowerPoint? I'm like, hey, I already have Office 365. Offer me something else that makes more sense. So, what are your thoughts on this? Like Microsoft just saying, hey, you know what, we're putting ads in. Love it or
At
leave it.
least at least they're honest about it. At least they're coming out and saying, "Hey, it's ads like you thought." I wish they had been, honest in the first place. But I think this is going to be the new trend. I mean, we're in. Do I like it? No. Do I want to open up a brand new computer that I purchased or for review that has advertisements in it? No. But I think everybody's pushing the maximum way to get their products in front of consumers. And Microsoft says, hey, this is a way of us making money. Now, before they said it was ads, I would see advertisements or spots for password managers. They never fooled me in the sense that there's many password managers out there. I was smart enough that when I would see one specific one, yeah, they paid for that. Microsoft didn't give that spot away. So I don't think they necessarily fooled anybody. I think this is the new trend. I think Apple will certainly use this to their advantage. I don't see somebody like Apple necessarily putting ads right into their operating system, so it will be
They
used to
no
their
no they will put ads for their own stuff.
well, yeah,
That's their
yeah,
leverage.
you're right. That they will put ads for their own ecosystem. It's going to
Apple
piss
credit
people.
card, Apple One, whatever that TV streaming service is, like they'll put all
TV
that in.
Plus.
There we go.
It's going to piss people off. I'm going to just call it what it is. It's going to, but Microsoft is going to keep it there because obviously there is a certain percentage of people that when they see that, yeah, I need that. Click. Yeah, I need that. Click. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Click. But I think the API that you mentioned, where some of the things from Edge get filtered in, if they're going to do this, maybe that's the better way to do it because you're looking at the same ads when you're browsing. So maybe in some weird way it doesn't interrupt the user experience to where it just sticks out like a sore thumb. Maybe it feels more like a browser experience. People click on what they need or want and don't worry so much about the rest. That's the way I browse the internet. I will click on an ad if it's something that perks my attention. But most of the time, I just want the ads to do their thing and give me the option of interacting. And they're usually related to things that I'm interested in and things that I'm surfing about at that point in time. Shoes, clothes, technology, you know, furniture, whatever the case might be. But don't make it where you're surfing for a new laptop and you see an ad for a new mattress. That's going to get people's attention. That's going to tick people off.
Agreed. Totally agree with you. The last topic we have is going to be about Microsoft Copilot and a new feature. And the new feature is basically called SWAT. Microsoft users and entrepreneurs basically will be able to use Copilot in the future because this is part of Microsoft's 365 roadmap. It was spotted uh, to ask it a basic SWOT, which stands for Strength, Weakness, Opportunities, and Threats. It's the usual method for asserting the viability of a business by approaching all the general key points. Again, this is a key analysis taking into consideration using all the existing data from a company, normally private data. We'll see if they figure out enough language models to make it public data that they can pull from in order to get an assessment. But if you are an executive, CEO, or someone who's looking to perhaps maybe looking at a buying opportunity. Maybe the company has given you enough of its own financial data to see if you are willing to buy in or buy not, or not buy in on it. You'll be able to ask Copilot soon for a SWOT of it. Basically the pros and cons, a list of all the documents and topics that they can analyze to say, hey, what are the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats of this particular business? Now, you and I had a conversation about this off mic about how this will be used and where Microsoft's Copilot is really going for versus where we would like it to go for. And I'll let you kind of start that last bit of conversation right now.
Well, I think what we were talking about, that you brought up some very good points, where companies these days rely on the data person, the financial person, to pass data to somebody to generate these reports. And now with this SWOT mechanism, companies can use Copilot to say, hey, instead of giving me a monthly report, a quarterly report, how about a weekly report? How about a daily report? And then they're able to dive into this data and see data that maybe they're not able to see as often as they would like, or even in real time. Like, for example, what was our top day for profit in manufactured goods for this week? What was our top day each week? And they can say, hey, we sell better on Tuesday. Why? We don't sell good on Thursday. Why? And then you go back to the marketing team. Maybe the marketing team helps you figure that out. Or you go back to your product development team and say, hey, well, it's about shipping. Maybe it is. People need to get, whatever you're selling during the week, so they don't buy it at the end of the week because they know they're not going to get it till Monday. So maybe that tells your sales folks and your marketing folks, hey, figure something out for free 2-day shipping, or, order it by Wednesday. Figure something out for overnight shipping. Order it Thursday, get it Friday. I think this is a big deal for what we talked about as far as businesses being able to get their hands on more data quicker, get their hands on data as it happens, instead of, well, we had this happen the first week of the month, and the manager or supervisor does not see that data till the end of the month. So, wow, we could have screwed something up the entire month, or we could have made money had I had this data quicker, had it in front of me. And not only, you're not limited to the reports that your financial officer or whoever is giving you. You can ask Copilot to manipulate those reports into the data that you need, instead of having to hand it back to a person and say, hey, this is good, but now divide it down by the week, divide it down by the day, and you have to wait for that person to create that report and put it back on your desk. For businesses, big deal. The more data you can get in front of a supervisor, a decision maker in a business, the better off you are.
Yeah, I think what we were also mentioning too, 2 points, and I'll wrap this whole podcast up, is that we were talking about the job displacement, job replacement of certain things. This particular set of skills, which will be available, I believe, May 20, May for people who are paying for Microsoft 365, could potentially replace business consultants, people who are brought in. So even if you have a financial consultant or your chief financial officer who gets reports from their own management teams and stuff like that, they may bring in a financial consultant to say, hey, my management team brought me all these reports. I need to devise a plan of action for the next 4 quarters, for the next year, on how we're going to make a certain amount of profit in order to either IPO or just, get above water from where we're currently at. And this person will come in and look at all those reports and say, all right, here's your plan of action based on what you have. They no longer need that. They now have this in, Copilot. And again, it's coming out in May. We'll see how accurate it is, how well it does. It will need time. It is learning. This is part of the whole large language models, that they learn, the more data they get, more access they get to businesses, and more importantly, competitor information. Because it's one thing to be like, hey, you're doing this right now, but how does that measure in relation to other people or other businesses either in the same market as you, same product line, same sector? Because if they're all doing roughly the same, there's no real need to make any adjustments. But if Copilot has access to competitor information to a certain degree, they could say, hey, you're going to be heading down potentially a 17% revenue decline against other things that are happening as well in this market. So I said that to say this is that Copilot is becoming very business oriented. You and I would like it to be consumer oriented. We'd love to be able to do more specialized niche things within our own personal lives with Copilot to make AI seem like the AI that we see in movies, justify the whole hype for AI based on consumers. You want to be able to go tell your family or your friends, this is what AI is doing. You want them to respond saying, hey, I totally understand that. I see that because I'm doing it. This is what it did for me. And then you guys can share a conversation with that. Right now, it's only business oriented, and that's specifically in Microsoft's favor. We were discussing this because Google has the potential to make a very profitable and useful consumer product in Gemini because they have the devices, they have the Nest, they have all the nodes and points that they need in order to gather as much information as possible. They monetize the internet. Like, there's no way that they shouldn't be good at this, but they don't necessarily have the business acumen right now. They don't have the business profile that Microsoft has. And to our point off our discussion off topic or off camera, was that a lot of times consumer products derive from business uses. Like Office became a consumer story because people used it at work and they brought it home with them. People will use AI to replace jobs, to do specific things at work, and then say, hey, I would love to be able to use this version of it at home for these limited sets of occurrences. And Microsoft, is learning from that. So as that transition happens, Microsoft's in a very good position right now. They have a very large business profile to then say, hey, all your business use cases, we've trickled those down into consumer use cases, and you consumers can use it. And again, that's where Google will probably slip in and say, hey, we have all the devices you consumers use. We've learned from what Microsoft's doing in enterprise, and we've just started baking those into our products. So as soon as these consumers start saying, hey, I want to use this, Google's probably going to say, hey, excuse me, Microsoft, get out of the way, move. I got what they need. And they'll probably do very well with it. But until then, Microsoft's positioned very well to be like, hey, everyone who is willing to pay for this, because again, we just talked about them investing $12 billion into this. Microsoft's looking to say, hey, we invested just as much, if not more, and we want to start making a return on that immediately. And businesses are saying, yeah, we'll pay $30 a month per seat or $60 per month per seat in order to, potentially optimize our job performance, i.e., fire people or whatever, displace certain things or replace certain things, make things quicker for us to use. We're willing to pay for it. I don't think people are going to be willing to pay for Gemini just yet.
Not yet.
Last thought, and then we'll close this pod out.
I think you're right on target. I think we've got to wait and see what that filter happens, and how that stuff filters down from business to consumer. Because as we have mentioned before, and I'll say it one more time, a little briefer, consumers are dead set in their routines for the most part. They do not like change. Consumers have to see that reason to try something new, to adopt something new. And I think a perfect example of this is Google versus Bing. Bing has never been what Google is. I mean, even me, I've got Windows devices. Google is my default search engine. I've got Android devices. Google is my default search engine. I understand that. And I think Microsoft understands that to some degree. They were late to that party. They never called up. So I think that might be partly why you're seeing, as you mentioned, some of the push for Gemini, Copilot, some of these other models. They're not being shoved necessarily. They are being gently put on keyboards as Copilot buttons. Yes, they are. Even the gaming laptop over here that we've got in for review has that Copilot button on the bottom right corner. And I found that interesting. That okay, even the gamer that's going to go buy that is getting a Copilot button. It's not just, I'm on the X1 Carbon 2024. I have a Copilot button. but everybody's getting it. So it's going to be interesting to see at what point does the CEO come home and pick up his or her personal device that is not signed into the company and say, yeah, I want to be able to use Copilot at home. I want to be able to use Gemini at home. That is when you see the adoption, just like you said with Office. I remember that very clearly. I used Microsoft Office, get this, from Mac when I was in high school because that's what our high schools had. When I came home, it was something else. It was WordPerfect or something, but Office just had not trickled down. And then I went to a local electronics store, and Office was for sale in a stack of 3.5-inch discs. You made that purchase because now you had the same thing at home that you had at school. So then you started seeing it on CDs and you started seeing DVDs. And I think you're going to see the same thing here. Sorry for my tangent there. I know you younger folks have no idea what a 3.5-inch floppy or even necessarily a CD is with data on it, or even music
Hey,
for that matter.
use
But
Copilot. Go look it up.
exactly.
With that being said, we want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for another pod, another week of information and news, and hopefully some fun stories. Where can people find you if they want to continue this conversation offline?
David
Or online,
PHJ.
but off the pod.
David PHJ 1978. Threads and Twitter, still known as X, whatever the heck that thing is over there. Stop by, say hello. Some of you stopped by last week. I appreciated it. Feel free to stop by this week and tell me how Apple is going to get involved in AI.
Good conversation. People can find me at Mindhead1 on Twitter. You can find me at Kareem Anderson on Threads. I tend to not talk about as much tech as my partner does online. But if you're interested in talking about the X-Men animated cartoon, I'd love to talk to you about that. I've been enthralled with that, movies, other things like that. Again, I will talk about tech, but don't come expecting that to be the open conversation. Again, thanks for joining us. If you want to visit our website, which is again MicrosoftUnboxed.com. That's spelled MSFT Unboxed.com. Go visit there to go read all of our writings, editorials. We'll have plenty of reviews coming up in the next month. Both you and I have devices that are currently in our possession that we're reviewing. And then we'll be talking about, obviously, the upcoming showcase for the new Surface hardware. Hopefully we'll get our hands on some of that and report back to you that, hey, the Qualcomm dream is real. Until then, enjoy your weekend. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.